to Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something that we don't talk about. My name is Dyl, and today I want to switch things up a little bit. Instead of talking about the Oscars, I want to predict the summer 2025 domestic box office top 10 because I really enjoy it and we don't really get the chance to talk about it all that often here on the channel. So just diving right into this, if we rewind to last year for my video, I have to say, for as many things as I called on the dot, such as Twisters being this massive domestic performer and finishing correctly in the 4th place position, and having Inside Out 2 as our domestic box office champion, I also have to hold a fair share of L's because I did not have just one, but I had 2 Horizon films inside my top 10. So this year I'm really hoping to kind of clean up my act. I had 3 straight years of going consistently at 90% accuracy and at least having 4 films nailed in the exact position on that top 10 totem pole. Last year I crashed, I burned, I went all the way down to 60% accuracy, and I only had 2 films in an accurate position on that top 10. Because what I typically look for here, at least with the summer box office, is kind of similar to the Oscars as well. You look for trends, you look for things that you can see reoccurring year after year. In the Oscars, it's studios, it's the directors, the writers, the actors, just the feel of the movie. And then for the box office, it's kind of the same actually. Because your domestic champion, at least for the summer, is usually either a superhero sensation or an animated family film that has this iconic and connectable cast of characters. And you often see that your breakout films that a lot of people aren't projecting to do as amazing as they end up doing are films that either have great insider word of mouth or they have super buzzy trailers. And oftentimes they can be films that tap into the meme culture and dominate Twitter headlines. And you know, we don't do year-round predictions here on the channel, but we do have a Discord server which you can join in the link down below where we do get to talk about box office, and we even run an adjacent game like Fantasy Filmball, but for the box office. And for about a year, ever since it was officially announced, I've been saying that the Minecraft film was going to be massive, it was going to be a billion-dollar player, and even throughout the bad trailers, the negative press, the awful pre-sales, I stuck to my guns, and that movie is performing exceptionally so far. It's one of the few people to stick with it being a 100+ domestic opener, and it's roaring to dominate the charts this year. But we want to move away from what's happened in the past. We want to look here to the summer 2025 slate, and just like every year, I compiled a list of every major film that the studios are releasing in order, and we see that the Thunderbolts will kick off our summer box office season the very first weekend of May. And then we see that gauntlet that is the late June throughout July schedule, where we have F1, Jurassic World Rebirth, Superman, and the Fantastic Four. And then per usual, we have that empty August, but if you remember from last year, this is a place where we can typically see surprise films come out of nowhere and snag a spot in our top 10. Think about like Bullet Train or TMNT or last year's Alien Romulus. But just like last year, let's chop this list of movies down to just the ones I can see crossing that $100 million barrier, because this is a range that you typically need to be in that conversation for the top 10, because nearly every year for the past decade, you had to cross $100 million to let alone not just be in the top 10, but sometimes even the top 15. But going back to that list I mentioned before, last year I had 9 of our eventual top 10 summer box office hits on that list. I had left off the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni Colin Hoover adaptation, It Ends With Us, because at this point last year we didn't have a trailer, we did not know what insane headlines were to come out of this film, and all we really had to go off of was a poster. So I might be missing some massive players, but I also could be including some of the biggest bombs of the year, because last year I did include both Horizon films, and I did mention Borderlands. While I personally was not projecting much from it, I wanted to include it in the event that the video game crowd did come out to support that movie. So what films do I have on this year's list? I have 18 of these films, including The Thunderbolts, Final Destination Bloodlines, Lilo and Stitch, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, Karate Kid Legends, Ballerina, which I think could be this year's Borderlands, How to Train Your Dragon, 28 Years Later, Elio, F1, Megan 2.0, Jurassic World Rebirth, Superman, The Fantastic Four: First Steps, The Bad Guys 2, Naked Gun, Freakier Friday, and Weapons. So without further ado, why don't we kick off what my personal top 10 list looks like for this summer. And I mean, last year, it served me so good, so why divert from it again? Because family films that just have these childhood favorite characters just really, really do well year after year. And this year, it's just which one do I go with? Because we have 2 live-action remakes that I feel like are poised for massive turnouts both domestically and worldwide. One is from Disney, and one, oddly enough, is from Universal and DreamWorks. The biggest difference between these 2 potential top dogs this summer is just the energy and relationship around the original films, because I'm not going to sit here and deny that Stitch does not have star power, that he's not instantly recognizable, and that his synergy with the Disney brand at large isn't one of the most impressive things that are out there for an IP. But one thing I also have to bring to the table is you don't really see the streaming numbers for Lilo and Stitch being off the charts. You don't see people bring up Lilo and Stitch as one of the best Disney animated films of all time. But on the flip side, with DreamWorks and How to Train Your Dragon just posed some amazing streaming numbers for the last decade. And even if its third film and its box office run didn't set the world on fire, because I think if you pair those streaming numbers with the fact that Universal seems to be all in with the Dragons at the Isle of Berk, because they're opening a brand new theme park down in Orlando, Epic Universe, just weeks before How to Train Your Dragon hits theaters with a whole land dedicated to the franchise. I feel like this live action adaptation is poised to hit the cultural zeitgeist this summer with families, just like Inside Out 2, just like The Lion King, and just like The Incredibles 2 of years past. And I think that Disney even knows this themselves, because just a few months ago, we were about to have this matchup of How to Train Your Dragon and Elio on the same exact day, and Disney quickly flooded the scene and delayed a week to get out of the way of the future summer box office crown champion. You can catch my prediction for the top film of summer 2025 when it hits cinemas domestically on June 13th. So with the live-action How to Train Your Dragon movie as my number 1 film this summer, that makes my number 2 film pretty obvious, right? But I would say it's actually not that easy, because in addition to the 2 live-action remakes we also have 2 reboots of iconic superhero franchises, and we also have the third film of an iconic franchise that has roared 3 straight billion-dollar worldwide grossers in a row. So last year, I was saying it was Inside Out 2 versus Despicable Me 4. This year, I think there's 5 films that have a realistic claim to the throne. But I do have Universal winning this year, so who's my runner-up? And I think I'm going to be going with The Mouse. But instead of the live-action remake you think I'm going to be saying, I'm actually going to learn from my mistake of last year and give credit where credit's due, because even if the previous entries inside this franchise don't say that this massive increase in sales is on the horizon, but I feel like the buzz around Fantastic Four feels eerily similar to Deadpool and Wolverine from last year. But this is yet again another massive event film from the MCU, and sure, you can say the last few years the MCU has been on a downwards trajectory year after year, but a lot of those films are not reaching the highs of the heights of Phase 3, and they're just not really cultural events. But I find that Fantastic Four totally is going to be a dominating force behind the continuation of what I assume is going to be the resurgence and the rebound for the MCU, back behind another film we'll talk about a little bit later on this list, because it's bringing these iconic Fox characters into the fold while also pairing them with massive stars. I mean, we have Pedro Pascal, we have Joseph Quinn, and I mean, I can only assume it's going to be the first major stepping stone to gear things up for the return of Robert Downey Jr. and his Doctor Doom. Fantastic Four looks like a great bet this summer, and it opens up on July 25th. So with me putting the Fantastic Four First Steps as my runner-up for the 2025 summer box office crown, I think it's now time to talk about everyone's favorite alien dog, Stitch, with his live-action adaptation, because it's arguably the odds-on favorite to win the summer box office crown. I mean, look at our box office, look at the trades, look at the Filmball Discord server. Everyone is projecting that this movie is going to win this year, and I can totally see it. However, I also see an avenue where there's this massive roadblock in the way, and it's his audience reaction. And yes, I know everyone does love Stitch. Yes, these live-action remakes can be bulletproof, critic-proof, audience-proof at times, but we've already seen some backlash for the casting and narrative changes that are present in the trailer alone. And I'm not saying that they're right or that they're just, but we have seen, especially with the Disney live-action remakes, you make any changes and there's going to be a vocal minority of the online film space that goes into a frenzy and starts hate posting the movie to death. And while I don't think Lilo and Stitch is going the way of like Snow White or Joker Folia do. I could see this limit the potential ceiling, sort of like how The Little Mermaid from a few years ago still did solid, but it was really dealt a bad hand and it had a lot of unfair and negative reactions before the movie even screened to anyone. Still though, I think the love of Stitch and a clear runway for this movie to dominate with family audiences puts in the discussion of this upper echelon to get somewhere that Little Mermaid can never even dream of. And I also think that there's a giant possibility that this is the meme movie of the summer. And all of that just adds another leg for this film to surpass even the highest of expectations. I may have it in third place, but this easily could be the champion of the summer. We'll find out how massive Lilo and Stitch will be when it opens up on May 23rd. So we've had 2 Disney movies, now let's get to Universal movies, because the Jurassic franchise is a really odd case. 2015's Jurassic World took a big bite at both the domestic and worldwide box office, being one of the biggest movies of the entire year, backed by love from audiences and critics at the time. But in the years since, it seems like a lot of people have cooled off on the dinos. Because just looking at the numbers, Jurassic World, $653 million domestically. Phenomenal. Number 2 movie of the year at large. Then we fast forward a few years, we have Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. This film, it was trounced by critics and had a mixed audience reception right out of the gate, but it still managed to rampage at the box office and roared up $417 million. And then we saw the most recent entry, Dominion, kind of follow in suit. It was a little bit more positively received by both audiences and critics alike, but it did continue the drop off domestically at just $370 million. So by this trajectory, you would think that Rebirth would fall even lower, maybe even dip to potentially under $300 million domestically. But I think that injecting this franchise with a soft reboot with a brand new cast headlined by Scarlett Johansson, Jonathan Bailey, Mahershala Ali, and being helmed by someone so creative like Gareth Edwards, Rebirth could really ignite the critical and audience reception and support for this franchise, and we could see it tick back up into that $400, maybe even $500 million domestic range. And I think that it really has a potential opportunity to be our number 1 film of the summer. We'll just have to see how much of the box office that Jurassic World Rebirth eats up on July 2nd. It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's just a film I have coming in 5th this summer domestically, James Gunn's Superman. And yeah, I'm gonna be honest, gonna be upfront. This is maybe my biggest, boldest take of this entire video. And because it's the fact that I think that James Gunn's Superman may not be this giant chart-topping best movie of the summer like many people out there do believe. I think that the DC brand outside of Batman is just in such an awful spot with the general audience right now, and that casting a non-super recognizable actor in the lead role could hurt the film's opening weekend, and that the expectations around James Gunn's DCU Kickstarter might just be a little bit too high, so it could be unfairly treated a little bit rougher than expected, or really just killing the legs on this film. Now, I don't want to just sit here and doom post on Superman, because James Gunn has shown time and time again that he's just a creative you just don't doubt, because he has shown with an array of different films that both the quality and box office performance are things that you do want to see. And while yes, the Suicide Squad did falter here domestically, you can argue that it was both a tough sell and that we were fresh out of the pandemic with this film premiering both on HBO Max and in theaters at the same time. But at the same time, Gunn does have this proven track record, and that this film is potentially one of the most anticipated movies of the summer, and it has arguably the most recognizable IP of any film coming out this year. So like, what's the massive drawback? But for me, all of that is the drawback, because when has Superman ever been a box office staple outside of Christopher Reeve's original franchise? And even then, a lot of the sequels continued to falter at the box office until they eventually became just massive flops. But hey, I'll say this. If Superman does explode this year, it is the best film of the year. It is what everyone wants it to be. This could put up like a Top Gun Maverick, a Barbie levels box office out there, and be the biggest film by far this summer. But I just don't really see that at this moment, and that's currently why I do have it as my number 5. If we hit this worst case scenario, it could even dip a little bit lower. However, we can catch the start of James Gunn's DCU with Superman in theaters on July 11th. And yeah, Superman, and maybe my biggest boldest take of the video, it could also be my most massive L of this entire video. But this next one is one I'm really excited to talk about, because we're off to a film I can see being this year's Twisters, which if you remember from last year's video was my best called shot, because I can see this film just being one that defies all of its projections, and it continues to climb and climb with every new update. And while Twisters did come in fourth last year and had this movie down a little bit at number 6, the biggest difference is, unlike Twisters, that was really just a domestic thing, I believe that F1 will be even larger internationally. Because F1 is a movie I've seen some people not even have in their top 10 for summer 2025, and I just think that's crazy. You have one of the world's most popular and most buzzy sports paired with the ultimate dad movie in a summer filled of superheroes and remakes and more family-oriented stuff. I think that F1 will really stand out for all the right reasons. I could see F1 being a massive hit with both audiences and critics, and both opening big while also having amazing legs for weeks to come. However, there is one just massive hurdle with F1. Unlike other massive adult skewing hits for the past few years, like Twisters, like Oppenheimer, like Top Gun Maverick, it's the fact that F1 is only going to keep its premium large format screens for just 1 week, as Jurassic World Rebirth comes in the following week to steal them all away. One of the reasons why Twisters and Top Gun Maverick and Oppenheimer succeeded so much is the fact that people went out to see them in these large screen formats. Twisters had 4DX, Oppenheimer had IMAX, Top Gun Maverick had Dolby, and they played in these screens for weeks on end, and most of them, after they ended their original run in these large screen formats, they came back for multiple weeks and just racked up these extra dollars on these more expensive movie tickets. At the end of the day, I do believe in F1's prospects. There's just that one just giant roadblock that it may not be able to zig and zag its way around. We'll have to find out how far F1 can zoom up this summer's top 10 list when it opens up on June 27th. The next film on our list is actually the movie that's kicking off this year's summer 2025 box office slate, being the MCU's Thunderbolts, which we do have pre-sale data for, and we have heard about the movie's quality. Both have been doing pretty well. And in fact, Thunderbolts' performance is one of the reasons why I am so confident and high on Fantastic Four, which I talked about earlier inside this video, because on most reactions so far, Thunderbolts rules. And it should have great staying power to kick off this summer, unlike a lot of duds last year, like The Fall Guy, Garfield, and Furiosa, all three which came out and underperformed its opening weekend tracking, and its critical and audience support wasn't high enough to really help it rebound after that opening weekend flunder. Yeah, I see what some people out there are saying, that the Thunderbolt is sort of like the MCU's response to the original Suicide Squad, which was a massive hit with audiences. However, that film had Margot Robbie and Will Smith while they were still the biggest of big stars, and Thunderbolts does have Florence Pugh and Sebastian Stan, two actors that have become favorites of the MCU as of late. But the Thunderbolts' biggest drawback is the fact that it apparently has this darker tone to it, and it's dealing with some very heavy themes, which from accounts, it works for the movie's benefit, but at the same time, for its movie's box office projections, it could keep some families away with younger kids from catching this movie, as well as just the lack of the giant megastar. There's no Iron Man, there's no Spider-Man making a cameo inside this movie. We won't have to wait long, though, to see how Thunderbolts does to kick off the summer as it opens up nationwide this Friday. Moving over to my number 8 pick, I already know what some of you are going to say out there. Mission Impossible, the final chapter, all the way down at number 8. But I mean, Dead Reckoning did the same in 2023. And I think that summer 2025 is going to be a little bit better across the board. But I want to be optimistic here. We are all super excited for the conclusion of Tom Cruise's decade-spanning action franchise. However, I do think there's a cap with these movies, and I think that the last one really showed it. Because yes, Dead Reckoning did have to deal with the cinematic craze that was Barbenheimer, but still, it had a sluggish start out of the gate, and the legs really fell off once those two movies hit the domestic landscape. But this time around, instead of having at least 1 week into itself, it's opening against Lilo and Stitch the same week 1. And yeah, I do hear what some people out there are saying. It's counter-programming. Both films can coexist, but one of the reasons why some of the previous Mission Impossible films did so well is the fact that people are coming to see the stunts on the biggest screen possible. And when you're having to split screens from the jump, I could see it just not go as well as you're expecting, because it's coming off of a movie that already underperformed, and this could lead to yet again another entry coming in under expectations. But hopefully what could work in this film's favor is the fact that it is premiering at the Cannes Film Festival a few weeks before its release here worldwide. And this film could garner some of those best of the franchise type buzz, and could see an uptick in interest and sales heading into that opening weekend to put up a better fight against Lilo and Stitch, and showcase that it does have more staying power than just its opening weekend like the last film showed. We will all find out how well the culmination of the Mission Impossible franchise does domestically at the box office when it opens up on May 23rd. And yikes, we're all the way down at number 9, and I have yet to mention a true animated movie on this list yet, but just looking at so many previous years' top 10s, we have at least one, if not a good handful, of animated movies. Just the thing about Summer 25 is a lot of our typical animated juggernauts are just live action remakes. Look at How to Train Your Dragon, look at Lilo and Stitch. So what do we do here? We could look at studios like Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, Illumination, and even Sony, which has typically shown up in years past dominating the summer, but this year Illumination, Walt Disney Animation, and Sony are all sitting this year out. Yeah, Paramount is sending the Smurfs film out, but is that gonna do anything? No. But for this ninth spot, I want to talk about Pixar's new original film, Elio, and I could be severely underrating this movie by only having it at number 9. Because look back to 2023, Elemental, it defied the odds for Pixar. Awful reception out of the Cannes Film Festival, a very poor opening weekend, at least based on projections. But somehow, it found its audience in the weeks and the months after its opening weekend. It had some of the most amazing legs we have seen for any film post-lockdown. And it ended up as one of the 10 highest grossing films of summer 2023. In fact, it outpaced a Fast and Furious movie, getting to over $150 million domestically on a sub $30 million opening. And yeah, Elio, it doesn't have the brand recognition such as Inside Out 2 or Toy Story to make it a true chart-topping option, but Pixar has shown time and time again that it has such strong brand energy around it. Plus, it won't have that whole negative aspect around it like Elemental did. It won't have weeks of negative PR around the film detrimenting its opening weekend. And I think that honestly, had Elemental gotten a little bit extra positive buzz at the Cannes Film Festival, there's a good shot that movie could have gotten over $200 million domestically and came in the top 6 that summer, right behind The Little Mermaid. My one major drawback with Elio is, unlike Elemental, this film has had some production hell and has been delayed multiple times, which tells me that unlike that film, there is a pretty good chance that the general audience may not come out to support this movie after its opening weekend. They could see it, they could hear about it and be like, well, it's Lightyear. It's fine. It's not great. It's not worth the money. I'll seek out something else, especially with Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon being options in the market. We will have to find out how strong Pixar's brand new original film is when it releases on June 20th. And now we're to the 10th and final entry on our list here for today. And unlike many other lists, I don't see this film popping up time and time again. Maybe my personal love for this franchise is skewing my perception, but hey, the reception and the overperformance of 2022's The Bad Guys at the box office and its great performance on streaming these past few years tells me that this film could see a good-sized uptick for its box office performance. Plus, that whole thing I said earlier about August movies tend to surprise because they're underpredicted, because they're not as big as buzzy titles, but they still have a whole month. This one comes out on the very first week of the month. It will have 4 weeks clean to run ship. And at that time, a lot of the other family films have kind of already phased their way out of the market, and I can only assume that the reactions for The Bad Guys 2 are going to be great, and the increased buzz and admiration for the franchise, I can see this film sneaking into the 2025 box office summer top 10 as my final spot. We'll have to find out if The Bad Guys can rob the final spot this summer on August 1st. So those were my top 10 movies of the summer, but I do want to give a few honorable mentions because, as you saw last year, a lot of my honorable mentions were the films that ended up coming into those top 10 placements for my big flops with the 2 Horizon movies as well as Garfield. So let's rewind a little bit and go back to that list of 18 movies I can see crossing the $100 million domestic chart this summer. And the ones I had the most difficult time leaving off of this list were the 3 horror movies I want to talk about here, since we tend to at least have one break through and find their way into the top 10. Just this year, I'm not sure which one will be the one to break through, and even more so, I'm not sure which of my 10 above films I would want to take out the most. The first one I want to talk about is Final Destination Bloodlines, which opens up later this month. Buzz around this movie seems to be pretty positive. This is a franchise that has shown time and time again that people will show up, and I could see this one kind of performing like the first Scream reboot that we had a few years ago. The biggest drawback here is how in the zeitgeist is Final Destination still in 2025? And unlike the Scream reboot, which had Jenna Ortega, Melissa Barrera, as well as bringing back iconic cast characters, at least from what we've seen from promotion about this movie, it's a brand new set of characters, Will that keep it back, or will that allow this franchise to continue to grow and maybe surprise its way into the top 10? And then we have Megan 2.0, which I think oddly enough has a lot of the same reasons to be in the top 10 as The Bad Guys 2, because both are coming off of great performing predecessors, ones that overperformed both at the box office, both with audience receptions, and have done phenomenal in streaming the year since. And then of course we have one of the most anticipated horror movies of the entire year at large, 28 Years Later from Danny Boyle. But my biggest drawback with this movie, and it's one that I see a lot of people projecting for the top 10, is unlike Alien, which showed horror can be massive in the summer, Alien had a proven track record at the box office. It's had multiple films dominate and be some of the biggest films of their respective years. In addition to the box office, it also had this insane buzz around it from the studios, as well as having a very interesting cast, plus a director that has turned out hits recently. And 28 Years Later, it does have the buzz, it does have the cast, it does have Danny Boyle attached to it, but 28 days and 28 weeks were not huge at the box office whatsoever. And I know that they came out in a different landscape. There's been time to grow, find a new audience. I'm just not sure how high 28 Years Later can really go this year. But hey, I mean, if we see stuff like F1, Elio, or even the Thunderbolts really struggle with word of mouth, these three horror movies can spice up our list. And I didn't even mention things like Freakier Friday or Karate Kid Legends or Ballerina, which all have their defenders and have people projecting them for top 10 performances. To me, though, they all have just major red flags that aren't really even worth considering. But there you have it. That is Fantasy Filmball's 2025 summer box office predictions. I took some big swings like How to Train Your Dragon as my winner for the summer, F1 to zoom up the charts, and I didn't include any true horror films in my top 10. Maybe I'm underestimating movies like Superman, which I have all the way down at number 5. And like I said before, I didn't even mention movies like Karate Kid Legends, which could tap into that Cobra Kai audience, or Ballerina from the world of John Wick, which has a very devoted fan base, but this movie has had some massive production issues and it's rumored to be a major mess, which I could see this being like the Borderlands type movie this year that just is DOA from Arrival. Regardless, though, we will have to see, but of course this goes without saying. No one knows what they're doing when it comes to box office. Just look at Sinners this past month. The trades, the tracking were all promoting low 20s opening, and it's had 2 straight weeks of $45 to $50 million. It is doing so well because that's the fun thing about box office. It's so unpredictable. Walk-ups, word of mouth, the quality of the film, they all play a massive part, and no one knows any of that weeks, months, or even sometimes days in advance. So I would love to hear your predictions down below. Let me know what movies you are most confident in this summer, and which ones you believe are going to be the biggest bust of the year. What's our horizon this year? And if you made it this far inside the video, consider leaving a like. It helps the channel continue to grow, and if you also love award season, feel free to subscribe. We are doing year-round coverage here in Fantasy Filmball. In fact, my co-host Matt is actually on the way to the Cannes Film Festival, which kicks off here in just a couple of weeks, talking about some of the biggest movies in the upcoming award season circuit. But until next time, my name is Dyl. This has been Fantasy Filmball. Peace.